All right, guys, review 2, proportions and percents. Great topic to review at the beginning of the year, and arguably one of the best topics for you to use when you're studying and preparing for the ACT. We're covering it on the second day of the year. So, which makes it maybe sound a little bit overwhelming, but it's actually one of the most basic concepts that you learn in math ever, not just high school math or middle school or elementary. This concept, this first one right here at the top of proportions, is the most powerful single concept when it comes to taking the ACT. There are 45 questions on the ACT. Usually about 25% of them you can answer by setting up a proportion. If you don't know what a proportion is, it looks like this. It's when you're comparing two different fractions or when you are comparing two different situations that are proportional to each other. You saw a lot of story problems like this in middle school and intermediate school. 7th grade, they probably taught you, and you did a lot of problems with like the proportions of shadows. Like if your shadow is 10 feet and you're 5 feet tall, then how tall is a building that has a 100-foot shadow, right? You would use the comparisons to set up a proportion. You would say, oh, this is the shadow of me, and this is me, and this is the shadow of the building, and this is the building, even though I move things around a little bit. But the idea is it's a comparison. We're not so much worried today about setting up the comparisons. We're going to do that throughout the year off and on. What I do want you to remember is when you set them up, what you put where matters, okay? If you are comparing cups of sugar that you're putting in a cookie recipe, you can put the sugar on top and the cookies on the bottom. But you have to make sure on the other side the sugar goes on top and the cookies on the bottom. So other than that, if you can set it up right, the math is very simple. Mr. McConnell put this on here. He calls it the fish. You probably remember the term cross, multiply, and divide. That's what I will say the most, and that's kind of the steps that you go through to solve this problem. So let's look at it. 9 over x, you've got that fraction on the left, equals 3 over 10. That's your fraction on the right. What's cool about these is some of you can do a lot of it in your head. If the numbers are simple numbers, if you're pretty good at division and multiplication, you can look at both sides and figure out what the x should be. If you can't, mathematically, the way that you do it is you cross, multiply, and divide. And what that means is you take the two numbers that are at a diagonal from each other. So in this case, it would be the 9 and the 10. And you multiply those together. 9 times 10 is 90. Then you take that answer and divide it by the number that's all by itself, that 3 that's left over. We don't want to divide it by x because that doesn't help us. But you take that 90 and divide it by 3. 90 divided by 3 is 30. So that means that to keep this fraction compared to the other fraction, this x value would need to be 30. All right. So doesn't matter where the x is. This next example, 5 over 6 equals 25 over x. You look at the numbers that are diagonal from each other. So these two are my diagonal. So what I want to do first is 6 multiplied, well, I'm going to use a dot. 6 multiplied by 25. 6 times 25 is 150. And then I'm going to divide 150 by the number that's left over, the 5. So 150 divided by 5 is 30. So that means this x being 30 makes the left fraction, 5 over 6, equivalent to the right fraction, 25 over 30. That's what makes that proportion true. Okay, the one on the right, bigger numbers, but no big deal. We don't care. I look for the two numbers that are at a diagonal. As soon as I see two fractions, opposite sides, as soon as I see an x, I know I'm going to cross multiply. So 10 times 30. Well, 10 times 30, well, I'm trying not to use x's to confuse you. 10 times 30 is 300. 300 now is going to get divided by 300 because that's the number that I haven't used yet. 300 divided by 300 gives me 1. So that means for this proportion to be true, x needs to be 1. So I could say x equals 1 on this side. On the other side, I could say x equals 30, or I could just write it in the fraction spot, right? Okay, that right there is about half your homework. About half your homework is, here's a proportion. I don't make you set them up until the story problem's at the bottom. But the main practice problems, that 1 through 21, oh, never mind. It skips every third problem. So 14 questions there at the beginning. You're going to cross multiply, divide to find the missing piece, all right? When you get to the story problems, it's going to ask you to set up the proportion. So the first story problem talks about pencils and boxes, individual pencils and boxes of pencils. So it would probably be a good idea when you set up your proportion to set up individual pencils and boxes of pencils as your ratio. Anytime you see two things being compared to each other, there's a good chance you're going to set up a proportion to solve it, all right? Okay, second part of the homework is wanting you to remember how to take the written sentence and turn it into a math sentence. Okay, we want you to take these percent problems that are very common on the ACT. They're very common on if you go apply for different jobs or to different schools or different like technical programs, that a lot of times they give you an entrance test or a placement, or if you can pass this test, we'll give you the job kind of a thing. These are the questions that show up on a lot of those, and in this class too. So a couple of things I want you to remember. Let's talk about English and what it means in math. So anytime you see the word is, what I'm looking at right here is this part of the diagram. Anytime you see the word is, the way to translate that into math is with an equal sign. Okay, so is and equal are equivalent. So is equals. Anytime you see something like what number means you don't know what number. And when we don't know something or the value of something, we usually use an x or a variable to represent that number. So when you see what number, you're going to use x. The word of in math means multiply. And if you need to, you might want to write multiply next to that dot. It's just a random dot floating, and it might be hard to notice that it's a multiply dot, right? So of means multiply. 87, I love this, that we put this on there. 87, believe it or not, means 87. And then also recall the last one down here at the bottom, 97% can also be written as 0.97. So depending on what calculator you're using, that 97%, it might be easier to make it 0.97. The calculators that you're using in this class actually have a percent button, so you don't have to make it 0.97. You can actually type in 97% and it will do the math appropriately. So the way this works, we use that translation to take a sentence and turn it into a numerical sentence, to turn it into a math sentence or an equation. So if I look at the sentence, this first example that's already done, it starts with 45%. Well, 45 just means 45, and percent just means percent. So you write 45%. Of, we talked about that earlier. If you see the word of, that means multiply. So after the 45%, you should put a multiply sign. When you see what number, earlier we said that means you don't know the number, so you put an X in that spot. Anytime you see the word is, you should be thinking equal sign. And when you see the word 90, you put 90. So what that sentence, 45% of what number is 90, you can write that as 0.45, or I don't like that. You can also write it as 45%, right? 45% times X equals 90. Once you've written it that way, then it says right here to just solve for X. Once you have the equation written out, you just follow the steps and solve the equation. So, a couple examples. 25% of 60 is what number? It's a lot of words. I'm just going to start translating them. So 25% means, 25%. So I'm going to go ahead and write 25% of means multiply. 60 means 60. So 25% of 60 is, that's supposed to be an equal sign, what number? So this is a little different than the last example because the what number is now on the right side. It comes after is. So 25% times 60 equals X. X is alone. I love it when X is alone because that means all I have to do is put the other stuff in my calculator or my brain, whichever one's working better today. So 25% multiplied by 60, if you put that in your calculator, you are going to get 15 equals X. Just like that, you're done. You didn't even have to get X alone because it was already alone. Okay, second example starts with what number? Well, what number means X is, that means equal. What number is 10%? I'm going to go ahead and write 10% of, that means multiply, 950. 950. So this is a lot like the last one. It just switched the way it gave me the information. X is still alone and by itself. So I don't have to move anything to the other side. All I have to do is type the right side into my calculator. 10% multiplied by 950. That leaves you with X equals 95. Now, if you don't have a percent button, you could have typed 0.10 multiplied by 950, and that's going to give you the same thing. It's going to give you the same 95 that it gave you with the percent symbol. All right. What percent? What percent? So that means I don't know the percent. That means I'm looking for the percent. So that's kind of like X percent because I don't know what it is. Of means multiply. 40 is what the word that comes after of. Is means equal. 24 comes after the equal, after the is, so 24 goes over there. So what percent of 40 is 24? Whether that sentence makes sense or not, now that I've written it as math, all I have to do is get that X by itself. It is being multiplied by 40. So the opposite of multiplying by 40 is dividing by 40. So I'm going to divide both sides by 40, and that means X percent is equal to 24 divided by 40 is going to be what? 60%? Well, if you type, sorry, I'm doing the math in my head and I'm skipping steps, which is going to mess up your calculations on your calculator. When you do 24 divided by 40, a couple of different things might come up on your calculator. It might tell you 6/10, depending on how you type it. It also might tell you 0.60. Those are the same things. 0.60, 6/10, that means the same thing. So I'm just going to put 0.60 right here. Now, X percent is equal to 60, 0.60. Well, remember how percent just meant the same thing as moving the decimal twice? Like 50% is the same thing as 0.50. So that percent symbol, all that means when I have this percent right here is that this decimal, I need to rewrite the 0.60 as a percentage. It doesn't want the decimal answer, it wants it written as a percent answer. So I take that 0.60 and I move this decimal to the right 2 places, and that becomes 60%. So x equals 60%. And hopefully, when you start seeing these decimals, if you see 0.25, oh, that's 25%. If you see 0.05, that's 5%. 0.99, that's 99%. 1.50, that's 150%, right? Hopefully that's a change you can make really quick. So on the homework, as soon as you see that 0.60 or 0.5 or 0.02, really quick you can move the decimal and know what percent that is. And I think that does it for the notes, because the other page, we just had the one page today. So homework, problems on the left, proportions that I want you to solve for x. The problems on the right are word sentences that I want you to put into a number sentence and solve. Find that number that it's looking for, just like we did in those last couple examples. Problems at the end, there are 5 story problems. I'm going to start saying this now, and I'm going to try to pound it in all year long. Story problems at the end don't mean if you want to, okay? Those problems at the end, first of all, they're the most likely to be what you see on the quizzes. Those are closer to ACT level questions than the simple number ones up above. So you need to do them because that's what you're preparing for. You're preparing for the ACT. Unfortunately, if you skip all the story problems, you can maybe solve 2 of the questions out of the 45 on the ACT because it is almost entirely story problem. So those are not optional. And usually what I do is those problems alone are usually worth about half the points. So when you don't do that problem at the end, it's not like, oh, I skipped number 1. It's like you skipped half the questions, even though it's not half the number of questions. It's usually about half the points of the questions. So make sure you do those story problems at the end of every homework. They're worth the most points, and they are what prepare you for the quiz and the test. All right? Good luck. Come see me if you need any help.